Hi, Joanne. Thanks for joining me on Behind the Build. I'm Paul Drake, and this podcast is all about getting real insights from leaders in housing, manufacturing, and construction. There's no scripts, no sugarcoating. Here's how I'd like to structure our conversation this morning. I want to understand your background, the trends you're seeing in the industry, whether that's technology, market shifts, or operational changes, the challenges you're facing right now, and where you'd like to take your business over the next 6 to 12 months. We'll wrap up with any insights that we both might find valuable at the end. Does that sound good?
Good to me.
Cool. It'll probably take about 30 to 40 minutes. So we'll jump straight into it then. So we're going to talk about your background and company. If you wouldn't mind explaining a bit about yourself, your role, and how you ended up in this position.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Joanne. I live in Huddersfield. I'm married to Steve. I have two sons who are both at university. My early career was in UK financial services, and then moved from managing sort of very large call centres of people into student accommodation, PBSA world, probably about 15 years ago. I've sort of worked for some of the largest operators in the UK in PBSA. Also had my own consultancy business for a couple of years, which was amazing and terrifying in equal measures.
Yeah.
And the great thing about that was I got to work with clients across the broader living sector. So I worked with build-to-rent clients, later living clients, as well as PBSA, and they're all variations on a theme. So that was a really fantastic background for me. In April of this year, I joined Nido Living as their Chief Operating Officer. Nido as an organisation has probably been around for just over 10 years. Started off life as a UK-based operator, worked with an investor, was a sort of owner operator, and then also managed some third-party relationships both in the UK, and also interestingly was one of the first organisations to expand into Europe, and working in many European jurisdictions, which obviously gave the organisation some amazing insight into how Europe is the same and yet very different to the way that the UK works. In terms of Nido was purchased outright probably about 18 months ago by CPPIB, who had a minority shareholding of Nido for a while. And that really is the sort of, I suppose, Nido, if you like, Mark II, really, which is working with our owner investor to really deliver a strategic plan for purpose-built student accommodation across Europe. CPPIB are very involved in the business, which is amazing, and gives us really an opportunity to become a substantial player in the European market. So literally 4 weeks ago, we successfully acquired Livenza Living. So Livenza were a competitor of ours in Iberia, but a very, very successful organisation in their own right, managing and developing multiple assets in Spain and Portugal. And so the two combined organisations, as we are now, become a real sort of leading force in sort of the European PBSA world. And we're mainly focused in Iberia at the moment, so all of our operating assets are in Spain and Portugal, but we have recently, in the past 4 weeks, announced our first two assets in Italy. Yeah, so Milan and Turin, which is very, very exciting. And we also have recently appointed a head of market for Germany, and he will be leading the charge for us to develop a portfolio in Germany as well. So the overall sort of strategy is 5,000 beds across 4 European geographies: Portugal, Spain, Germany and Italy by 2031. My sense is we'll do more and go further and go faster. I think that's the nature of us as an organisation, and that means it's a very, very exciting place to be.
Excellent. So what does a typical day look like then for you?
Well, one of the wonderful things about working in sort of operations is there is no typical day, and anybody who works in operations will tell you that. So, I mean, it could be anything, but at the moment, the key things that we're working on, I suppose, number one is integration. So we are in the process of integrating 2 organisations, and it's really important that we take the best bits of both organisations and put them together to have a much better whole. So We're just going through that process at the moment. We've got some exceptionally talented people within both organisations, which is great. We've got some amazing assets, some fantastic customers. So, it's a real, positive set of variables, if you like, in terms of really taking us where we need to go. So lots of work involved in that. We're also looking about growth and development. So looking at potential opportunities in the future, looking at, I spent half a day this week looking at our new Milan site to look at how we could optimize some of the structure and configuration within the site so we can maximize revenues and maximize efficiencies as well, which is fantastic. So growth is a huge part of it. I think another element is clearly people. Although, people with classes has been in the real estate sector, we're actually an organisation of people. And when people are going through a big change, such as everybody in our organisation is going through at the moment, it's hugely important that you listen, communicate, understand. I've personally spent time out in the assets, meeting as many of the asset teams as I can, and with my very poor Spanish, trying to interact with them in the best way possible, because I'm a great believer, have my whole career, that buildings have a personality. And how can you possibly talk about rent levels? How can you talk about competition? How can you talk about what capex is needed at that asset? What maintenance is needed, what the team configuration should be, if you've not been there and understood how it works and how it operates, because no two sites are the same. So, working with people and trying to get the best out of people and give them the opportunity to grow and develop and shine is hugely important. And I suppose the final thing is, as a member of our GEM, our exec committee, as well as all of the change and the growth, we still have to do the day job, and we still have to deliver shareholder returns to our shareholder. So what does that look like at the moment? That's sort of finalising our 25 letting cycle, which is largely done, and then beginning to look ahead to our 26-27 letting cycle in terms of what that looks like for us as a business, looking at what capex is needed across our portfolio, whether that's defensive capex to maintain compliance or to maintain efficiency, or whether it's offensive capex to look at refurbishing an asset or gaining competitive advantage. So any day involves all four of those elements in a variety of ways, dependent upon what's happening at that particular point.
I suppose your days are going to be interesting if you've got all those things to contend with, that's for sure.
Absolutely. There's never a dull moment, and no day is ever the same.
Yeah, good. So we're going to move on to industry trends and technology then. So are you seeing any trends within your industry, especially around sort of technology and operational efficiency? You've touched on that a number of times already. Are you seeing any trends in that?
Well, it's interesting. We see a huge opportunity in the whole sort of data, digital and AI world, as indeed I'm sure a lot of organisations in our sector do, without necessarily, to be honest with you, understanding what that means, because it's difficult sometimes to sort of cut through all of the noise around what innovations are out there that will actually make a difference. But I think what's true is that there is a huge opportunity to engage with technology to certainly more efficiently manage our assets. So if you think about the way that a sort of technical BMS would be configured and how you'd manage that from centrally, the ability to manage all of the BMSs centrally and to have all of your sensors connected and be able to sort of change temperatures, turn lights on and off, change ambient controls, all of that type of stuff. It sounds on one level a bit like Big Brother, but on another level is a huge opportunity when you're managing an asset of over 13,000 beds with an enormous utility bill, to be able to really make sure that you're managing that portfolio efficiently. I think also from a building perspective, to be able to engage with technology that proactively identifies issues. So, we spend so much money in our sector and certainly in our business on reactive maintenance, where something is broken and gone wrong. And at that point, you're dealing with a huge level of customer dissatisfaction because they don't have hot water, as an example, or the water pressure's gone. And any technology we can employ within the buildings, they become much more smart buildings where we identify in advance that might be a particular failure, is just going to A, help with our customer service, but B, mean that we can proactively manage this, so you're able to procure more effectively and that type of stuff, as opposed to doing it as an emergency, which always costs you a lot more. I think as well how we use technology to interact with our customers is an interesting one. This is an interesting conversation, because you intuitively think that the generation of customers that we're servicing want to do everything from a technological basis. And if I look at my own children, who are of exactly the same age as our customers, yes, they do want to, when it suits them, engage in a technology efficient way. But actually, at the point where they have a problem or they have a concern, they want to talk to a person. And so I think that's really interesting in terms of what we don't want to do is go for 100% automation, because I think you lose so much of that. And also in the whole concept of mental health, well-being and loneliness, and working from a pastoral care perspective, you want physical touch points with your customers. So I think it's a balance. But I think ultimately we're all here to improve the NOI of our assets and make sure that our returns to our shareholders are the best they can be. So anything we can do to make that run much more efficiently has to be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you seeing any impact from AI, automation, or any sort of digital tools in your space at the minute then?
I mean, there are a number of operators who are employing some digital tools. We've just launched a chatbot on our website, which is we've done in collaboration with CPPIB, and that is very early days. We've only just launched it, but again, we're getting some really interesting data and learnings from that, in terms of almost like which queries are most appropriate to be managed in a digital way, and which queries aren't and require human intervention. And I think we need to learn about that and work that through. And yes, there's a lot of building related technological innovation that obviously isn't just happening in my sector, it's happening across the whole real estate sector. And I think that's really interesting to see where that would go. And the concept of smart buildings, but also well buildings, and wellness accreditations for buildings that talk about things such as airflow and access to natural light and ambient light and all of that type of things. If you think 20 years ago, we were designing buildings full of little boxes for people to live in, and I think we've all come to the point where that is not an appropriate way to live. No. So what is the appropriate way to live? And we're doing a lot of work as an organisation thinking about our rooms of the future, and how, working with our customers, we've done a number of focus groups to see what they want, because I'm not our target market. If I think it's nice, it's probably wrong. So actually sort of working through all of that and really sort of configuring what that room should look like. And what we're trying to work around, Paul, is a configurable room for a customer. So obviously within certain restrictions, but that you could have 10 rooms in a building and go into each of them, and each customer has decided to configure them differently dependent upon how they want to live. That's amazing. I mean, if we can get to that point, I think that's really sort of taking our industry on to the next level.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. What concerns or uncertainties do you have with these sort of industry shifts, would you say?
Well, I think from my perspective, there are three big ones. The first one is cost. We've seen, just as an example, utility costs just go through the roof in terms of all of our assets. And you could think it's a UK issue. It is a UK issue, but actually it's a worldwide issue in terms of utility costs. So whether it's through ESG initiatives or efficiency initiatives, we've just got to be better about minimising how the utilities that we use and manage that much more effectively. But it's not just utilities. Everything is becoming more and more expensive. So actually, the whole cost per bed metrics, which we measure ourselves against in this sector, is becoming more and more challenging. to manage our buildings more efficiently. And obviously, bigger buildings tend to be more efficient because you get the economies of scale. But so cost and cost management. So whether that's efficiencies, technology, good procurement, customer education, all of those things I think need to link towards how we manage our costs more effectively. The second key thing, of course, is revenue, the other side of the NOI debate. And there's a lot in the press at the moment around how sustainable are the rent increases that we're seeing in our sector, and the impact on universities. Every week there seems to be a university, certainly in the UK, that's sort of cutting roles and reducing their budgets, and so you sort of, where you've, as an operator, been able to put 5%, 6%, even 7% year on year rent increases into your assets, is that sustainable? Maybe in some small markets it might be, but I think broadly, you get to a point where you've got the law of diminishing returns, and what do you focus on, occupancy or revenue, and how do you manage the two? So I think that's going to be a real challenge for the sector. And then the third challenge, I think, is talent, and I mean, access to great people. In our, in the sort of the PBSA world, we are competing with the hospitality sector, the hotel sector. There's an awful lot of different industries who want talented, capable, hardworking people. So what can we do as a sector, and what can Nido do as an organisation to make sure that we're a really attractive prospect for people to come and work with us and choose to trust us with their careers? It's with the acquisition of Lavenza, it's great because we have so many more assets where we can develop people and give them really clear career paths within our organisation, and that's absolutely amazing if we can do that.
Great. So you've talked about challenges then, so flip that on its head. What opportunities excite you most?
I mean, like most things, the challenges are also opportunities if you sort of flip them. So I think the things that excite me the most are, there's the opportunity to grow and develop into new markets, and whether that's expanding the concept of living more broadly from PBSA, or going into sort of new markets like Italy, as an example, is generally an undersupplied market for PBSA. We haven't operated in Italy before, so the exciting thing for me as an operator is building an operating business in Italy, and I'm sure a lot of it will be the same as we say have in Spain and Portugal, but a lot of it will be very, very different, and it's always getting the best of both worlds there. So I find that very exciting and challenging. And I think for me, from a sector perspective, what's exciting is just understanding what's going to happen with sort of further and higher education over the next 5 to 10 years. You are starting to see some shifts. If you look at the sort of global top 100 universities, there's several in that group that are now Chinese universities, and maybe 10-15 years ago there weren't any, or maybe there was one. So some of your big international markets that a lot of PBSA industry has relied on, you're beginning to see some changing behaviours. Also, from a domestic perspective, in all of the countries, government policies can have a real impact on how domestic students choose to study, where they choose to study. Across the whole of Europe, you're starting to see a much bigger move towards domestic students studying near their homes because they just can't afford the additional cost of accommodation on top of everything else. So yeah, I think there are some real opportunities, and as with all of these things, nations that perhaps think outside the box and take a slightly different approach will probably be the most successful. So let's hope that we're in that category.
Yeah, definitely. So have any of these challenges hit the bottom line then? You talk about the costs and the fees and the people. I'm guessing, it's inevitable, isn't it? But
yeah, I mean, it is inevitable. I mean, look, we've had a very successful, we haven't announced our results yet, so I can't share any details, but we've had a very successful year, achieved good occupancy at good rates and managed to, manage our cost base. But actually, year on year, that becomes more and more challenging because of the different issues that we have. Spain and Portugal. Spain especially is a very domestic orientated market, and it's interesting operating in Spain if you take the concept of online bookings, whereas in the UK probably for many operators 60, 70, even 80% of their bookings would come online through a website or via perhaps a broker. In Spain that's not really the case because it's much more of a domestic market, and you have families working with their young person to choose that educational environment for them, of which the accommodation is a really big part of it. So I suppose it goes back to my earlier point, Paul, that you can automate and you make efficient all of your processes, but you mustn't lose the fact that you're still a people business dealing with people, and you've got to keep that at the essence of what you're about.
Yeah, you touched on it already. It's that balance, isn't it? It's finding the right balance to get the automation as much as you can, but don't lose sight of the people.
Definitely.
Good. So we're going to move on to current state and strengths of the organisation and business. So where would you say your business currently is in the market? You mentioned your acquisition.
Yeah.
So
we're sort of, you may have seen on LinkedIn, we're very busy at the moment. We're very active. We have big ambitions, and, we're a vertically integrated organisation that gives us a big benefit in terms of taking a long-term view on the assets that we own. We're not about to flip these assets, so we're prepared to invest in them to be the very best that they can be, whether that's from a condition perspective so that they're the most attractive asset to a customer, whether it's from an ESG perspective so that the most environmentally credible asset in the sector, when we develop assets as well, we're going to hold ourselves to very high standards in terms of what accreditations we have, our sort of responsibilities to the communities that we're part of. And those are all great things to say, but really hard things to do. So, I think that the key thing for me is us being able to achieve those. But obviously, the acquisition of Lavenza has just taken us completely up a level. And, as a joint organisation, we're just really excited to see what the future holds.
So as a company, what do you do extraordinarily well, would you say? What's your strongest point?
From my perspective, we have great people, and with the acquisition of Lavenza, we've got even more great people, which is amazing. And I think if you start with that premise of having great people who are really committed and motivated and want to do a great job, then it sounds very simple, but everything else sort of falls into place. So great people is the first thing. We have some great assets as well. Lavenza have designed and developed and then operated some amazing assets in Iberia, and Nido have developed and invested in and operated some great assets in Iberia. We've got some really great buildings that we can be proud of. I think the other thing I would say is our ambition. We're a very ambitious company, and we're lucky to have a very supportive and ambitious shareholder as well, and that makes a big difference in terms of what we want to achieve, but also what they want to help us achieve, which is a great position to be in.
Yeah, that sounds good as well. So in terms of feedback from your customers, students in this case, what's the one thing that they say collectively that's positive about the company?
I think they say lots of things, but if I had to pick on one, I would say the sense of community and belonging. There is this epidemic of loneliness across the whole of Europe at the moment, probably the world, and our young people are absolutely at the heart. You've got the sort of the younger population, the older population, who are both in their own ways suffering this epidemic of loneliness. And it's a hard thing going to university, and you're expected to be really excited about it and high-fiving everybody. And for some people it's like that, and for some people it isn't, for all sorts of different reasons. And so actually, much as we're not their counsellor, we're their accommodation provider, but there are things that we can do, whether it's the design of the building, whether it's the events that we have, even little things like knowing people's names and asking them how their day has been. Interactions like that can make such a difference to people. So I would say it is that sense of community and belonging. And of course, if you have somebody who feels resonance with the brand and feels resonance with where they're living, they're much more likely to rebook with you, and they're much more likely to recommend you. So much as we would be doing this from a sort of responsible, caring perspective, obviously it has economic benefits as well, which, is a positive double whammy.
Yeah, definitely. And there's one common theme throughout most of these podcasts. If I had to pick one word that people say throughout, and it's community, in whichever aspect you look at it from. But it's a common thread throughout.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's pleasing to hear. Anyway, I'd say. So moving on to future goals, then, where would you like to take the business over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I think the next 6 to 12 months for us is about successfully integrating our two businesses together. And obviously, as you can imagine, that ranges from integration of systems, integration of processes, integration of practices. There's an awful lot of work involved in doing that. And the second is growth. We are actively looking at other opportunities in Italy. We'd like to add to the 2 acquisitions we've already made, looking at multiple opportunities in Germany as well. So, again, it'd be great if we were able to deliver some of those in the next 6 to 12 months. So, I suppose those are the 2 key things for us, which, will certainly keep us all busy.
Yeah, it's good to have something to aspire to,
Absolutely.
isn't it? And in that sort of vein, what's the biggest challenge from an operational point of view do you expect to try and achieve these objectives in the next 6 to 12 months?
I think when you're integrating 2 businesses, that's always a challenge because, we have different processes, we have different systems. Much as we're in the same sector, in the same city, in some situations, we've as 2 organisations, approach things slightly differently. The key thing is that you take the best bits of both and put them together. And sometimes that means that you don't opt for the easy route, you opt for the harder route because that's the best long-term solution for you as a business. We're very lucky we've got a talented group of people who are leading the integration across the whole business, because it's not just from an operations perspective, it's from every aspect of the business. And teams on the ground who are really keen to sort of, really take this opportunity of 2 organisations coming together and come out with something that's even better than both of them were by themselves.
So I know you're very early into this integration of 2 companies then, but so far, what's been the biggest challenge, would you say?
What's been the biggest challenge? I think the biggest challenge is, just balancing the sort of the communication. And, some people want to hear a lot, some people don't want to hear a lot. We're at a key time of the year for us in terms of finalising one academic year going into a new academic year. So, there's an awful lot of moving parts at the moment and a need to work at pace. And you've just got to remember that you've got to take people with you and, keep communicating and keep involving people. And that's hard. It's something that we constantly, check against ourselves to make sure that we're doing. Carlo, our CEO, has established like a fortnightly town hall that he delivers to the whole organisation, which is a really great touch point for everybody to come together and hear about what's going on. And the feedback to those has been hugely received. But obviously there needs to be a whole network of communications that sits alongside that to support that. So I would suppose that's our biggest challenge.
Great. So from a personal perspective then, and what does reaching those goals within the next 6 to 12 months mean to you?
Well, obviously my job is around, the whole sort of operational infrastructure and the management of the portfolio. So what does that mean to me? It means well-run assets, full of happy customers, full of happy employees, that are fully compliant, that, when the tap is turned on, the hot water works, and when the shower's turned on, it works properly. And we have community events that make a difference to people's lives. And we're delivering great NOI performance to our shareholder. Just a few things to keep me busy.
Good. Well, thanks that we've come to the end of the podcast, Joanne. So it's been really, really beneficial from my point of view, and fantastic that you've been so candid with the real challenges and opportunities that you see in your industry. And thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
Not at all. It was great to talk to you. Thank you, Paul.